gentlemen, I am OmnusI here in my basement lair. Happily enough, a friend of mine on one of my social groups actually just kind of pitched out, hey, does anybody want to get involved in a streaming podcast about 5th edition D&D? And it kind of came out that she's looking for players for an online game. And I volunteered my services. I was actually kind of excited. You know, people are really into that, and I think a good group really does give people an opportunity to see the game in a different way and see how different people interact with the game. I certainly got my share of experience in 5th edition D&D. I'm not afraid of that. And of course, in my penchant for using voice and things like that, I think I'd be a good fit for most groups. I have a private space down here in my basement that I could, pitch in, and, a podcasting microphone. I think I'd be an asset to most groups. So it got me excited with the possibility. Now, I haven't heard anything back from her. She may have found someone else. I may not be considered, which, well, it happens. But I was thinking to myself, if she did say, okay, you're in, we want you to make up a character, I started to think to myself, self, your opportunities for playing games doesn't come around that often. You really should think about what you want to play. And now most people go into making a character and think, first of all, the class they want to play determines how you play. But lately I've been getting more and more into the color and flavor of the various peoples of the D&D world. What other people would call races. It's an unfortunate pejorative on that. But I was thinking to myself, really, what do you want to play? What have you played in the past, and how does that color your opinion? And I think, sometimes it's useful to know what's going through a person's thoughts and things like that. So I thought I'd pop out a video on how I prioritize the different races, as D&D calls them, and how likely I would be to play any of them. What are my priorities if I get a chance? And I thought I would list this before you. Now, just so you know, there's a lot. There are a lot of official races, the ones that are actually in the books, the ones that you can get on D&D Beyond and play with. So I kind of lumped some of them together because they're at a place because of the company they keep and the type of creatures they are. So if you're okay with that, hopefully you'll enjoy this little treatise on the different races and my feelings on them, on how much I'd really want to play them or not play them, as the case may be. Now, we're going to go bottom up. So the very last thing that I want to play is a human. Not because humans are boring in a fantasy world, it's just I've done humans. I've done lots of humans. Most of my most memorable characters, even in the space of fantasy itself, have been humans. I don't really want to play a human right now. It's bad enough having to be one. For a little while, I want to not be a human. So that's why my last characters have been a Goliath and a dwarf. And I played both of them not as if they were humans who were really tall with big muscles. I really embraced the role of the society and its imprint on the characters and really took it from that standpoint. Their personalities were largely fueled by their race. So, for instance, Galhard, my Goliath, was very happy-go-lucky, didn't care or plan. He was confident that his physical strength was going to be able to carry him through almost anything. And he loved getting into a fight and scrapping. And if it came to even fighting a dragon, he'd just get in there and give it a big hug and try wrestling it to the ground. That was his way. Corbrecht, my Dwarven Wizard, on the other hand, was very practical, analytical. He sized up challenges and wasn't afraid of a physical conflict if he needed it, but he basically worked on perfecting his craft, didn't use his most powerful spells most of the time, but he stuck to what he knew, the most reliable spells he did, and sacrificed his own potential numerous times to protect the rest of his group, which I was very much in the mind of his dwarven heritage and roots. So, as far as ever wanting to play a human again, sure, but I've got lots of other games that I can be a human in. D&D in the future is probably not something that's going to see me playing a human anytime soon. So, that's number one. Now, second to the very last are all of the races that are strictly tied into a particular world, because I generally don't think those travel very well. If the game is not set, for example, in Ravnica, you have very little chance, really, of coming across a Simic hybrid, unless the DM shoehorns that into their world. The Vidalcan, I don't see them showing up almost anywhere. Now, there are a couple that come from the different books that I think could make an argument that he could have traveled between worlds, and maybe it's just because they weren't in the book. Doesn't mean there aren't necessarily, for example, populations of Loxodons in Greyhawk. It's possible. But all the same, the ones that are really tied down to a particular world, unless, I'm playing in that world and I know it, I'm really not going to consider that too strongly. So that would get rid of the Verdan from Acquisitions Incorporated. I know they're in Forgotten Realms. Not too interested. The Vidalcan, the Simic Hybrid, the Kalashtar from Eberron sounds neat, but I got a lot of other things that are higher priority than that. That also does include the creatures that are stuck in one particular sphere that they do well in, like the Triton. If you're doing a water adventure, great. If you're off water, why? You need to stay somewhere in a watery region, otherwise it just becomes extra hard and more of a nuisance. You lose all of your advantages and the nice things to it. And I'm not saying I'm doing this to power game, but playing a fish out of water idea, literally, doesn't just appeal to me all that much. The same thing goes with the Grung. Same thing. Even though they might be kind of cute and cool, the water dependency is annoying. Alright, so that being said, number 28, there's a lot of them. That is one that's shared by the monstrous races. Those are the ones that just about everybody knows as a monster, with the exception of a few, but this is going to include, for instance, the Hobgoblin, the Lizard Folk, the Yuan-Ti Pureblood, and Hobgoblin, Bugbears. Bugbears, Hobgoblins, Yuan-Ti Pureblood, the Lokatha. Just really not all that interested in playing them. I know there's some great stories that you can tell with them. You can have some great redemption stories. Or if you're playing in a game that's a little rough, you can play a scoundrel among scoundrels. And that's cool. It's just not what really appeals to me at this time. So while I'm not saying you can't make great characters out of those, I'm just not as interested. The next step are all of the minute monster races, which are the goblins and the kobolds. I have played as an NPC a goblin, Globnob Scrape. He was fun. And it's cute playing off of that. I'm a little guy in a huge world, and, I'm scrappy and all of that. I'm just, not that interested again. Same thing, just, more going uphill. It takes a certain campaign for that to really excite me. So, not something that I'm really at this point considering. But again, the right campaign, if somebody pitched it or somebody gave me a character and said, here, you want to play this? If that was my option, I would definitely do it. Number 26 is the Minotaur. Now, the Minotaur is in, I believe, the Ravnica again. But, Minotaurs are all over the place. They were a playable race in Kryn, in Dragonland setting. And I think that they're popular enough that, they're a viable player race, clearly. It's been balanced for 5th edition. And I can appreciate their savagery and everything like that. Just personally, never been a huge fan of the Minotaurs. I could very easily see myself playing them at some point, but at this point in my life, with all the other options to look forward to, I don't really want to see myself constantly as an outsider struggling against that. Oh, you're part of these savage races, and not as interested in that as certain other options that make themselves available. Number 25 are orcs. And this covers all of the different orcs. You've got your orcs of Exandria from the Wildemount story. You've got your, let's see, there's orcs of Eberron. And then you've got your standard orcs. Much for the same reason as not wanting to play bugbears and lizard men and such. But I'm more interested in playing them because I'm interested in the unfolding narratives for what orcs' potential could be. I think orcs are really positioned by 5th edition D&D and a lot of game masters as being this race that's coming out of savagery and is almost ready to be considered among civilized races. Yes, they'll still be strong. Yes, they'll have a large warrior culture and everything. But I'm not opposed to exploring that. And I think it could certainly be very interesting to do. I'm not all about the orc lives matter and stuff like that. But I consider them to be a notch above your hobgoblins and bugbears for my personal interest level, just because if the campaign really is something that can allow me to play a character that is playing this kind of an outlander but not kill on sight, that might be interesting. It really might. So that's what puts it there for me. Number 24. Lost my... yes. The Shifter. The Shifter is, of course, from Eberron. They're okay. It's kind of like... I've been familiar with Shifters since 4th edition D&D, and they were okay then, but when their powers were basically just giving them another vehicle for the attacks that they would get or so on, or a dodge, that really, really nuked it as far as being interesting and flavorful. I could see a Shifter of some sort as being something I'd play. It's just not something I'd rush out for. I'm still not familiar enough with their culture to really fall in love with them. And if I really felt like having a character that could change forms into animals, well, I'd probably look at playing a druid. So, again, nothing I'm too excited about, but I could definitely see myself playing them. Number 23 is a Changeling. A doppelganger, but not necessarily an evil, manipulative race. Something that's a little bit more empathic that you can relate to, with those set of special abilities that really rely on you thinking your way through and to get the best advantages out of them. Being willing to put yourself out at a little bit of risk to try to pull off audacious dupes and ruses over people could be a lot of fun. Again, it relies on having the right group and maybe even the right world or the right scenario. I wouldn't be as keen on doing it if it was a dungeon crawl. Wouldn't interest me as much. I'd like something with a little bit more role-playing bite. Adventures taking place in cities, for instance, or just a wide-open sandbox. I'd be a lot more likely to want to play a Changeling in those kind of a scenario. Number 22. I had 22 right here. Yes, 22. The Furbolg. The Furbolg. Again, that's from Bolos. The Furbolgs have been around, I know, from 3rd edition at least. Probably, actually, no, 2nd edition, I believe. They were kind of a sub-giantish race, but they have an interesting racial kind of this isolation, because they're individually tough enough to kind of be by themselves. They don't need a large community to protect themselves. And they have kind of a detached view on the world. I think that would go well with a ranger or a druid character. I think it could be a lot of fun, especially marrying something that doesn't show up very often. It's a fairly rare race for most people, and just kind of coming in as the general outsider. And sometimes that can be really cool. It can lead to some interesting storytelling. And of course, being big and strong is rarely a bad thing. I think the nature of the race is kind of cool, and I've always kind of thought about, offhand, if I was going to play something that was a large, strong, powerful race. But instead I chose Goliath when I had my chance. But Furbolg definitely something I'd be interested in. 21 is one that actually is not in any of the books, but it's going to be. It's got to be coming soon. And that is the GIF. I loved the GIF. They're goofy, yes. It's a goofy race. They're the hippo people from, primarily from Spelljammer. Space hippos who dress up like British naval officers and love flintlock pistols. And they're big and tough, but they've got this British genteel, you know, honor and dignity above them. I always thought that was a kind of a neat race. Gonzo, a bit, yes, but I'd like to play a GIF. I've never had the opportunity to. And if again, they come out with the rules for them and somebody says, hey, you want to make a GIF? I'd be all over that. So I would like to do that at some point. So, you know, if Wizards of the Coast is listening, make GIFs, please. All right, number 20, a gnome. I'm kind of a victim of a lot of anti-gnome bias from some of my players, but anybody who's come from the earliest days where gnomes were reputed to really love practical jokes and pranks, even on their friends, might have had unplayable groups because there was a gnome in the group. I kind of never really encountered that myself, but some of the bias, I admit, has kind of gone in here. I don't hold anything really against gnomes. As a matter of fact, in my view, the three saddest areas that really weren't shown a lot of love until recently, I always thought in D&D, alchemy, tinkering, and herbalism were three things that were best expressed by the different gnomes. You have the rock gnomes, who are kind of the tinkerers. You have the forest gnomes, who would be great herbalists. And somewhere along the lines, there would be the ones that are into alchemy. Again, probably a rock gnome. So I kind of associate mentally with gnomes, but I don't really desperately want to play one at this point. If I was going to play a wee folk, there's another race that I'd have in mind that I'd wanted to play for quite some time. But again, I don't dislike gnomes. I actually like them quite a bit. But at this point, I'm not as keen on playing them. But if the opportunity presents itself, I do hope to play a gnome someday. I think it'd be a lot of fun. And I do like the point of view, the perspective of the race of gnomes in general. So, yes. So we go to number 19. Do I have a 19? Thought I had a 19. I do have a 19. Half-elves. To me, half-elves are kind of wishy-washy elves. I'm not really compelled by half-elves. I've rarely been in a campaign so in-depth in the roleplay that you actually feel anything for a half-elf being caught between societies. The only thing I've ever seen, really, that played that out was Tanis Half-Elven from the Dragonlance Chronicles, where that was really a thing. It was really hard for him to be a half-elf, and that blend of his human blood and his elven nature colliding made him a very compelling character, and I loved that. And most games, when you're playing an adventurer, you know, adventurers come from all walks of life. No one's going to judge a half-elf as any different. Most of them just, yeah, they're like a wishy-washy elf. So, not saying they're not interesting and can't be. I'm just saying most worlds aren't that in-depth in the relationship of half-elves to other races. Certainly there's a bit of, well, you know, blurring that has gone on over time because they want, you know, for example, nicer orcs who aren't as savage and kill on sight. And elves aren't, you know, as haughty as they used to be and aloof and you know, so that's my reasoning. But again, I would play one. Never played a half-elf before, I don't believe. So, now we go to number 18. Gosh, there's a lot of them. Tabaxi. I know they're the darling right now. Lots of people love their Tabaxis and everything, and I'm not opposed to Tabaxi as a you know as a DM. I can easily put Tabaxis in my world. If somebody actually came up and said, "Hey, I want to play a Tabaxi," my beloved wife actually said the next character she wants to play is Tabaxi, and I think that's cool. I think that's awesome. Tabaxis, as far as a race goes, are cool. I admit that I see potential problems with other people playing them, because if they really want to play them just as giant cats, you know, saying, oh, I'm just going to go wash myself in the corner, or I'm going to go pull out a ball of yarn and play with it, and really, you know, lean into the cat part more so than Tabaxis are cool humanoids who have feline features and everything, and a curious nature, but at the same time, they're still humanoids, they're sentient, they can get over those little quirks that dominate cats' lives. I would like to play one for the simple fact that I would love to play a character overwhelmed with curiosity, but I'm imagining this just gleaming black panther who considers himself a prince among his kind, is very proud and haughty, and I could play that. I think it would be a lot of fun, and it would give him the deep, rich voice, and he would talk with gravity, and would be very methodical until action was required, and he would spring into action with blazing speed, and I think it could be a lot of fun. So, languid power is how I imagine it. So they're on my list, certainly. Not the highest, but again, I'm not opposed to the idea of playing a Tabaxi. That could be a lot of fun. 17, a half-orc. Mostly because I've never done one before. Again, the half-orc positions in Fantasy Society, very few DMs I've ever seen really make half-orcs suffer for their race. They're strong, they're potentially dangerous, they're often thrown into this violent society. I think playing a half-orc could be a real, challenge, and could be a lot of fun in the right world with the right group. And I wouldn't mind doing it. But that being said, I haven't had very many opportunities to play different things, and I think I've only ever, in all of my years of playing, I think I've only remember one person playing a half-orc, and that was back in 2nd edition D&D. There's just too many other options that the players that I've dealt with have really clung to. So, even though they've got some really interesting dynamic powers and abilities and a perspective that could be certainly interesting, just, nobody I know has really been all that keen on it, which, kind of sad. 16, a Goliath. It's so low because I've played one already. That's it. I had a lot of fun with Galhard. Playing a Goliath is interesting because it means just being in the moment and just enjoying the thought that you are this big, massive, indestructible thing, and you can throw yourself joyfully into whatever you're going to do. I think that's really kind of cool, especially for those physical classes like fighters and barbarians. It would be an interesting thing to play a Goliath, sorcerer or something like that. But I just really, really enjoyed the chaos that would ensue with Galhard. And I wouldn't mind playing a Goliath again. I had a lot of fun. Obviously, there was a lot that was left on the table with Galhard that I would love to pick up with a different character and a different perspective. But they were great. I enjoyed my time with my Goliath tremendously. 15, a Satyr. A Satyr. And the Satyr is, of course, from the mythic Odyssey of Theros. Satyrs have always been one of my favorite fantasy creatures because of their ties to mythology and the relationship to Pan, and just being generally the great party animals of mythology. I think that the idea of playing a satyr would be a hoot, and maybe even playing against type. Obviously, your classic would be the bard satyr. And going against type, playing maybe a cleric of partying or something, or maybe even getting a little bit more serious, a satyr paladin could be an interesting combination of race and class. A satyr rogue could certainly be pretty neat, I think. So yeah, there's a lot of meat on that bone, and I wouldn't mind taking a good chew out of that with a character. As far as coming up with the character, the class, and everything like that, don't have anything concrete, but, it's certainly a character that I would not mind exploring. I just know that some DMs may not, because it's in Theros, may not be as interested in it if they're not interested in that kind of... But satyrs are monsters in most worlds, so therefore a player character satyr is not that much of a stretch, and I don't think the character race is that off balance. Right on the heels of that, my number 14 is the Aarakocra. The Aarakocra, again, is from, first from the Princes of the Apocalypse. Two things. Obviously, if you're going to get into an Aarakocra, you obviously know that flying is one of the strongest advantages you get. That means you can't carry very much, so something that does not need a lot of gear, like a rogue or a monk or a spellcaster, is a great Aarakocra. I can imagine an Aarakocra Storm Sorcerer being just awesome in concept. I would very much like to play that. I know a lot of DMs, though, who say, no Aarakocras. I don't want to have to deal with your flying stuff until you're ready to commit to casting spells to do it. Fair enough. But I've always kind of wanted to play one. I think it would be a lot of fun, and I think that having a bird voice could be very interesting. Yes, an excitable Aarakocra at your side to fight. Ah! I could have fun with that. I could have a lot of fun with that. I could see myself playing an Aarakocra. Still only 14, but it's on the chart, and if I ever find the DM who will open up and let me play an Aarakocra, I could have a lot of fun role-playing with that. Number 13, another avian race, the Kenku. I have some reservations about the Kenku because of the curse and not being able to say anything unique. They always have to repeat what they've heard. Their voice has been stolen from saying anything that they come up with on their own. But on the other hand, I think that being clever about using bits and pieces from other people's speech could let me play the character a bit like Bumblebee from the Transformers movie, you know, the Michael Bay thing, where he speaks in bits from radio. Okay, I could do that. And making him kind of a haunted character with that kind of a past could be a lot of fun. I also think that, you know, playing a character like a monk and taking a vow of silence could be really cool, allowing my actions to speak for me and using gesture. Obviously harder in remote games, though. Or possibly playing as a rogue could be really interesting. I never really had a problem with the Kenku as far as player characters. The only problem is how many players can do it right with the voice and everything, and only being able to say what they hear other people saying. You know, I don't know. But one thing that you can say, though, and I've kind of conceptualized this, is at some point you could have paid someone else to say all the things that you really need to say. And just say, okay, look, I plunked down 2 gold, I wrote out some sentences and had somebody say them for me so that I could utter the sentences that I want to say. And that's a cool way around the curse, honestly, I think. And I would have pages upon pages of all the cool things that I could say. And I would constantly be writing down quotes from other people so I could say what they said. I think that would be great. So, interesting is from a character. Notice most of these are interesting because it's the character that I want to play, not the race or the powers. I haven't even mentioned most of these powers, but you know, I just think racially these are cool races to think about. All right, then we got on to number 12. This one is from, again, Ravnica, the Centaur. I respect Centaur, the Centaur race, as, you know, the historians, the traditional point of centaurs in mythology. Obviously masters of archery, but also, you know, the historians. And I would play somebody who was similar. I could see very easily playing, say, a centaur warlock, you know, who goes around as an astrologer, you know, and then he actually has his power and his pact and everything, and I can envision this character quite easily, and I think it would be a lot of fun to do. The only reservation I have is that centaurs aren't necessarily good at a lot of things. Dungeon crawling, climbing, awfully hard when you've got the horse's caboose behind you, and it's just hard to imagine a centaur going along with a group through every adventure. If there's a lot of dungeon crawling, it's just too hard. Therefore, I think anybody playing a centaur should try to get some sort of way around transport in situations like that, polymorphing, maybe being able to turn to a mist or something, so that you can bypass physical obstacles, because that's going to be a problem that you have uniquely that is going to be very difficult to get around in some situations. Obviously, playing some sort of a spellcaster might really help you get around that, though. So, you know, like I said, Warlock, finding some means of flight or changing your form could be really, really useful for that race. Number 11, the Gith. I've never gotten to play a Gith. I've always been kind of fascinated with them, but many of my stories just did not involve either the Githzerai or the Githyanki. I think that their story is fascinating. I think a race that, you know, basically thumbed their nose at the Illithids who dominated them, and the Lich Queen who helped them break free, and that whole story is fascinating. But I've ever only used them as monsters, and not always monsters against the party, but sometimes NPCs that have helped them out. I had a Planescape campaign that they brushed up against the Gith at one point. I've always kind of held out a fascination for that idea, but never had a chance to pull the trigger. I think the idea of a Gith monk could be fun, but I think a lot of the other classes could be even more fun. And I'm particularly interested in some sort of compromise, I think, between the spell casting that I enjoy doing and, you know, something just more physical and visceral. So I'm not really 100% certain, but I think the Gith could be something that could be a lot of fun, especially in a campaign that really does take advantage of your racial connections and helps to spin the story. If you're just a maroon Gith on a world and nothing ever comes of you being a Gith, probably not as interested. You might as well play something else. But, you know, as far as the races go, the Githzerai and the Githyanki, I think are fine. They're cool. So, definitely interested in that. Number 10. Now we're getting to the ones I'm really keen on playing. Number 10 is the Warforged from Eberron, but I know a lot of people who've opened their arms to the Warforged coming into their world. I mean, you know, golems can exist. The idea of taking an advanced golem and giving it sentience, kind of a cool idea. And I remember from the Dungeons & Dragons Online game, being able to play a Warforged and watching their armor and their bodies change with the different runes and ways that you could, you know, upgrade yourself. And I thought that was really cool. It really kind of got me excited about the idea. And again, playing kind of this Adam character, it's like I am a created thing outside of your cycle of life and birth and death. You know, I seek to be my own master and seek for answers to why I am. And, you know, that's cool to me. That really engages me, and that's something I would love to explore again in one of these games. It would be excellent. And coming up with a voice for it, I'm thinking a detached, sardonic voice that talks like this would be kind of cool, but there's a number of different ways that I could approach it, and I'm really giving it some good, strong thought on that. Yeah, it's something I definitely would like to play at some point in the very near future. Number 9, the Turtle. Now I know there's a Turtle that figures into, I think, the Critical Role one of the seasons. Somebody was playing a Turtle. I don't know, I haven't seen it, but I like the idea of turtles, and part of it may be some lingering thing because I loved the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles growing up. And I liked Oogway from the Kung Fu Panda. I thought that was a really cool idea for a character. Really kind of neat. And the idea of a character who takes life slowly and not wastes time with haste could be a lot of fun. I think that, you know, having a different perspective on a longer period of time, not being so hasty, not rushing into things, could make for a very interesting character. And I can see him as a life cleric. Just don't waste your life. Be at peace, and you will find life is the richer for it. Being very wise, patient, methodical, I think could be a lot of fun. And I've already envisioned this character. And it could be a different class, too. It doesn't necessarily have to be that life cleric, but I really do kind of want to play this character. I flirted with putting it even higher up, but there's other things on my bucket list, and there's some pretty popular ones that are still up. You've probably noticed, because I considered all of the different races, and yeah, some of them are the basic core classes. So moving on, number 8, the dwarf. Hill or mountain, doesn't matter to me. I love dwarves. I really do. The only thing that puts it this low is that I just got done playing a dwarf. And I had so much fun with Corbrecht. I loved him as a character. I'm glad that I got to go through much of the campaign with that character. Going full dwarf, full Scottish accent, and I made a mistake fighting me, did you? You didn't expect to get a fireball in the face, did you? You know, my hammy Scottish accent, but I love dwarves. I really do. And if I hadn't just played one, it would have been higher. It would have been number 2 easy, I think. But I have just played one, and I have to try to give some time to some of these other races that I've never played before. So, yeah, that is on my list of things to play, but it's down a little bit. Number 7 is Elf. Now, I should have broken this up a little bit more, because there's one elf that I'm not interested in playing as much. Although I have to admit it's higher up on my list than it ever would have been. But for the most part, I have played elves before. I've played several elves. One of my most powerful characters I ever made was an elf. Just for the sake of it, I like the idea that elves can have a different perspective from everyone else, and I enjoy playing with that. If you think of an elf and their perspective as being human, I think it's a mistake. Elves really need to be a race apart. They need to have a different perspective on things, different priorities, in order to really feel like you're this potentially ancient creature that will be watching generations of your comrades come and go, and you're going to stay strong and healthy, and until far into the future you've got the perspective of centuries, and you are I like that. There's something that really appeals to me about playing a proper elf. It doesn't matter which flavor, except for the drow. The drow I didn't like for a number of reasons. I hated them back in the day, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, 2nd Edition Dungeons & Dragons, because I thought they were broken. Really, screw magic resistance. Screw it hard. I hated the rules for magic resistance back in the day. And the fact that they all had it just seemed mean. It seemed like one of those races that the creators of D&D made because, dang it, spellcasters are getting it too easy. We're going to make a race that just screws with them. I hated them so much. And then, 3rd edition, they became a playable race that kept the magic resistance. Ugh! Why would your DM do that to himself? Ugh. So anyhow, they're better now in 5th edition. I would probably put a drow somewhere around the 15 mark. There's other things that I wouldn't mind playing, but honestly, I don't dislike drow as much. And I know some people really hate drow because of the popularity of Drizzt and all the people who want to play Drizzt. That I think is slaked off quite a bit. The drow just remain a coolly exotic race, and now that they aren't all evil and some of them aren't just edgy, they're fine. They're fine. I'd play one. I would play a drow. Mostly in 5th edition. But elves in general, the other types of elves, are solidly at number 7. Number 6. This one comes from, again, Theros. The Epic Odyssey of Theros. The Leonin. I looked at the Leonin, and I was immediately drawn back to the one character for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Other Strangeness that I made. I made a mutant lion, and I never got to play him. I thought he was so cool. And now now that I've read the culture of the Leonin, and they're just, I just think as a race, they just seem so cool. They're exotic enough that not everybody's playing them. They're like the apex tabaxi in a little bit. But I just think, playing a humanoid lion is a cool thing to do. I think they'd be really, really great. And I think I'd play one as possibly a paladin or somebody who would be in the front of the party and just throwing his shoulders back and daring anything to come on. And he'll take them on behalf of his pack and, wrestle it down. And I'm either stronger than you or you'll kill me, but one way or the other, we're going to settle this between us over and over again. I think that could be a lot of fun and make for a very interesting character. I'd certainly be excited to do it. Number 5, the Genocide. And yes, that's all of them. I know they're different flavors and everything. But air, earth, fire, or water, I think the Genocide are a neat race. And I always thought they were kind of cool. Earlier edition, when they were just basically humans with a little extra, that's fine. Back when they had a little elemental in them. But over time, I've come to realize that there's a lot of elementals. Genies and Efreet and the Tao and the Marids, they're all elementals, and they could easily, somewhere along your family's line, have gotten with one of your ancestors to create some genocide. You could have had some ancestors who spent time, maybe, 50 years in the elemental, or maybe you were conceived in the elemental plane and some of that energy just kind of got into you and gave you those powers. There's a lot of cool ideas for the genocide. People that are kind of removed from the rest of the races, but yeah, they've got neat abilities and powers that make them kind of cool. And, I like the idea of the elemental aspects, infecting their personality. I can definitely see playing just about anything, honestly. Any one of them is equally appealing to me. I like the idea of fire genocide and earth genocide, water, air. It doesn't really matter. Some of them I lean towards certain classes, like a genocide fighter or a genocide monk of earth could be really cool. Air, I think, would be awesome as a sorcerer or a wizard, maybe a rogue or a bard. Water would be a cool cleric or a bard. That'd be kind of cool. But more I'm thinking, again, the personality of these people that are just kind of tweaked in their perspective a little bit because of their elemental influences over themselves, and finding out where they begin and where that aspect that's touched their lives ends could be really interesting. So that's what excites me about the idea of playing a genocide. And again, I've never played one before, so I kind of like to. Number 4. An Aasimar. Now, I like the idea of the Aasimar, although kind of, my great-grandmother got with an angel. Okay. I prefer it more for people who are out in extraplanar, and I can see definitely the other side getting it on with people to create as many offspring as possible. That's why there's a lot of Tiefling, probably not as many Aasimar, but still, I just like the idea of somebody with, saintly origins and stuff. And I definitely can see playing an Aasimar and then a Divine Soul Sorcerer, for instance. I think could be really cool. Really leaning into that aspect, I think would be really, or a paladin. Somebody who really, I'm not looking for somebody who's fighting against, somebody who really just doubles down on, hey, my ancestors were all good. They've given me the power to prosecute the battle for good side, so I'm on it. I think that would be cool. And it could make for a very, very memorable character, a lot of fun. So I would look forward to that. Now we're on to the top 3. Now you could probably already guess them, because if you follow D&D, these aren't the most exotic of the races necessarily. But still, there's a reason for each of them. Number 3 is the Tiefling, and that includes the Feral Tiefling from the Sword Coast Adventures Guide. There was a time when I was kind of bitter about Tieflings. I felt that they were a Johnny-come-lately race, and they were for people who liked edgy characters. But you know what? Sometimes it's nice to be edgy a little bit. Sometimes it's nice to have that dichotomy of, I'm tainted by evil. It's written all over me. I can't escape it, but I'm going to fight it with all I'm worth. Or maybe this could be the character that I actually just say, you know what, give it to me. Give me the power. Sure, Warlock, great granddad, bring it. Come on, give me the power. I'll do whichever you want, and I'll enjoy the heck out of it. Give it to me. Give me what I want. I'm going to take it. I'm going to leave my mark in this world. That could be a very interesting character. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some games where that could be a real problem. But I would not do it in a game, for example, with a paladin and a cleric of long good. I would play it in a group that deliberately is going for shades of gray. Because I don't want to try to do that. I'm secretly trying to get contracts with people's souls while the others don't notice. Because as soon as they do, then it becomes you have to make a decision. Is he too loathsome to keep in the group? And if that's the case, then the person who's playing that character that made the group choose is doing it wrong. It would have to be the right group. But I could definitely see playing a tiefling without that aspect. I could definitely see being the one that fights for good and fights to prove that necessarily a bloodline doesn't necessarily make the person. And I think that could be really a cool idea. As far as the class that goes with it, it really doesn't matter to me so much. I think, honestly, I can see a tiefling from any class going forth, except probably the nature classes wouldn't intrigue me as much. Not saying it couldn't be done. I'm not saying that your tiefling druid is less than anything. It's just not the thing that I'm going for. I would definitely want to do something that conflicts with that good versus evil a bit more. Although the idea of I don't want to deal with good and evil, I'm going to retreat to nature, which is neutral, doesn't love or hate, it just is. Kind of an interesting idea too, now that I think about it. I could see doing that too. And I've never played a druid before, so maybe that's something that could be on the horizon. I don't know, but I am interested very much so in playing a tiefling. Again, I'm more interested in the curiosity of what that's like. And it would really be great if the DM was really leaning into what the person's race means to the people who look at them. If you're just another adventurer, just happen to have red skin and nobody's nervous about you because you're a tiefling, it loses a lot of its charm. I want somebody who people whisper when you walk by. And maybe there are people who are like, I'm keeping my eye on you because you are marked with evil. That, I think, is more compelling than just getting a pass. You know, you're an adventurer, so you're probably good. Getting a reputation as a tiefling, as being a pretty good guy, would be cool. I know you'd have to fight against it. Number 2. There's only 2 left. Can you guess the 2? If you're in? All right. Number 2 is the Dragonborn. I have only ever played one Dragonborn. It was a GM NPC in 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Dragonborn Warder, or I don't know, the one that's the commander that gets other people to do what they want. I like the idea. I just had a real problem when they came in with trying to shoehorn them into a world that really didn't have a place for them. There's already been kind of draconic races with the Draconians from Dragonlance, from Half Dragons, which was, I believe, a template you could throw in 3rd edition. I think there were Half Dragons in 2nd edition that I can remember too. I don't know about 1st. But the Dragonborn, an entire race that can breed true, and they keep that Saurian heritage and have breath weapons and are the colors of the different dragons. That really does compel me to a strong degree because I think dragons are awesome by themselves. Now play a race that, you know, is distantly descended and was the creation of the dragons, and the role-playing opportunities just cascade over me. I think the idea of playing a Dragonborn is really something that excites me tremendously, and I couldn't even tell you again which race I would play. But it would be a dynamic one. Could be a spellcaster. I'm not thinking wizard right now, but maybe a sorcerer, or a paladin, a gold dragon paladin dragonborn. Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Or if I wanted to go evil, a red dragon rogue, red dragonborn rogue, ooh, or red dragonborn warlock. Ooh, that is exciting. or a green Dragonborn, say, cleric or bard. That could be interesting. There's all these options, and they do all excite me to some extent. I would really like to play this class. And again, the idea of the voice, which my voice is getting kind of taxed with this video right now, but the idea of coming up with that voice and making him a creature of his heritage and his drive excites me to no end. Definitely a race I want to play at some point or another. If it's not the next character that I play, it'll be the one after that will be a Dragonborn. And my number one, this is a race that I have wanted to play for a long time. And I've only ever played one, and it was a GM NPC. Do you know? If you're savvy with your D&D races, by now you should. It's the Halfling. And you might say to yourself, Rob, OmnusI, whatever. Why would you play a Halfling? They haven't been interesting since Hobbits. Well, quite honestly, I think Hobbits are really cool. But my idea is this. I love the idea of playing a little person in a very big world who becomes greater than everybody around them, who is constantly overlooked and pipes up, but is constantly just, you're just a little one. And then, you know, if I want to be a Halfling fighter, I'd be a deadly fighter. Absolutely ruthless at getting one up on my larger adversaries. But what I really would love is the idea of playing a spellcaster. You know, oh, he's just a and not dressing up as a wizard either or anything like that. No, just looking like a normal guy. I was like, oh, it's a Halfling. Fireball. Doesn't matter if I'm small or not. My fireballs hurt just as much as a big person's. And just cheerfully, you know, using your experience as an equalizer and just that perspective. I'm enchanted with the idea. I've wanted to do it for a long time. My GM NPC that I played, Lawrence Sticky Buns, this was back in 2nd edition D&D even. He was fine. It was unfortunately a pet GM character. I'm not proud of that. He was amusing, but I really want to give it a good treatment. And I honestly can't remember ever playing a proper Halfling. In this current edition, there's probably less just strict stuff against playing a Halfling. They're balanced quite well now. And it always used to be there were some pretty stark disadvantages to playing Halflings in one way, shape, or form. Not so much anymore. I think Halflings are really a cool race. I've wanted to play one for a very long time, but never really had a chance. In the online games that I've played Halflings, and they were my best characters. Hands down. Wasn't even close. Both named Lawrence Sticky Buns. I'm not the most original person, I'll admit, when it comes to my characters. But I made one in Dungeons & Dragons Online, I made one in Neverwinter, Halfling Rogues, and had a lot of fun with them. It was great. So those are all of the races of D&D as it stands right now, and that's the order that I'm interested in playing them. A quick little review of the different races and my opinions on them as far as playability, the race, their positioning, and in where the universe is and where it's going. Maybe you found this useful. Hopefully it taught you a little bit more about what's going through my head at the moment. And I really do hope, so much that I get asked to play a character with a group in one of these live streaming things. I think I could add a lot to such a group. But we'll see. If that never happens, then hopefully someday I'll get into another game and play that Halfling character that I've been itching to play. And, somehow, some way, some shape and form, maybe I'll get to really make something of this list and maybe tick off a couple of those boxes on the higher end ones that I've wanted to try. Will I ever? Who knows? The future is a dark and tangled mess. But every once in a while, a little bit more light gets shed to it. So, cross our fingers. Now, there's one other thing too, and I'll put a huge asterisk. As I said, a lot of these are world-specific. Well, not a lot of them, but there are several that are world-specific. I haven't included intentionally any of the races from the world of Xanthe, which is the world for Gooey Cube, which I'm really kind of high on Gooey Cube right now. They have their own list of all these different races. Almost all of them are near human. They're human-ish. They have a slant that's been put on them by the various gods of that world, and there's a lot of them. More so than they keep leaking out new races all the time. So it's really hard to have a definitive order on any of them. But if you haven't really looked into Gooey Cube or, you know, that world they're creating of Xanthe, there's some really good stuff in there. And it's not just pretty art, although there's a lot of pretty art. If you haven't, I highly recommend, at the very least, taking a flyer and joining the Gooey Cube Den of Enlightenment Facebook group. That is their official Facebook group for their community and culture, and they constantly are leaking out pictures of their different races, ideas for their world of Xanthe. I can't recommend it enough. They got a lot of good things going on there. They've got creatures, races like the Scundrews, which are actually they were created by the god of death. And what happened was he was not allowed to create a living, breathing race, so he created shells, stole souls from all the departed that were going through his court, and he would steal them and he would stuff them into these bodies, and they were his race, the Scundrews, and as a result, they are kind of undead. They're not true undead, and they're free-willed, but it's fascinating ideas. And, you know, they have the Ethereans and just so many different races. I'm really kind of high right now on the Saplings, which are kind of a near halfling race, but they are overcome with wanderlust and just a fun race. None of the gloom and doom a lot of fantasy gets, but these are just very whimsical people, and just a lot of fun with this. They're orange to tan colored skin and orange eyes and bright red curly hair, and they're just neat. There's so many neat things to that world, and they're coming up with all the time, and I hope someday to have my own little mark in their world too. But I'm not including them because there's a lot that even I don't understand about that world yet. I need to catch up, and I hope to do so when the books start coming to me. So, thank you very much, everybody. This has been a little bit personal, but again, maybe this is something that I'm not trying to sell you on anything. I'm not trying to tell you that I'm not valuing your character or your favorite races by any stretch. Please don't take it that way. These are just what's going through my head right now as I prioritize and think about what I really would like to play myself if I got that golden opportunity. So, thank you for listening to me. I am OmnusI, here in my lair. Thank you once more, and I will see you the next time that I crawl in front of this camera and make one of these videos. Until then, thank you and farewell.